Well, welcome everybody to my birthday Secrets of Publishing panel. And I love the Strand bookstore, and thanks to Sabir and Tico and Nancy Bass. We were going to do this in person, but we all know how that turned out. And the benefit is my mom can now come from Florida. My brother Eric is in Michigan. I have students in France and in Italy that are staying up late. So it's maybe it's more exciting to do it this way. And since this is for my book Bible, I was trying to figure out what could be fun for my students and friends and aspiring writers. And I thought what might be interesting is that I have all these colleagues and former students who have these fantastic books out in all different genres. And people don't really spend a lot of time talking about the differences between genres and what you do to break in and how you know. So I thought, let me get some people with fantastic new books out to tell you all the secrets. So quickly, I'll introduce everyone, and then I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll take quick questions in the Zoom. So let's see, I'll do it by the Hollywood Squares. So Alison Gerber is the author of 3 best-selling middle grade novels, Brace, Focus, and Taking Up Space. Kavita Das is the author of a biography, Poignant Song, and a new upcoming book, Craft and Conscience. Tiffanie Drayton has her debut book, Black American Refugee, which is coming out from Viking in a few weeks. Amy Klein's debut book is called The Trying Game from Penguin Random House. Kenan Trebincevic is my co-author of The Bosnia List, which was out from Penguin. And our latest book is a middle grade book called World in Between, out from HarperCollins. Alan Henry, who's an editor at Wired, has a debut book coming out called New Work Rules, and that's out in June. Maria E. Andreu is the author of 2 acclaimed YA books, The Secret Side of Empty and her new book, Love in English. And David Goodwillie is the author of 3 books. The memoir seemed like a good idea at the time, the novel American Subversive, and the new novel Kings County. So thank you guys so much for being here. And as I said, I would like to focus on specific things that you guys did. There's a line I like, which is that successful people will do what other people won't to get ahead. And so there's a lot of things that people don't understand about books. Oh, and actually Kavita said I should mention why I wrote Book Bible in the first place, which was I did an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree, both in writing at University of Michigan and NYU. And I spent years and thousands of dollars writing, and I came out not even knowing how to write a cover letter. And it was frustrating because my parents were like, okay, move home. We don't want to give you money for New York anymore. And I just didn't understand. And it took me, I started writing when I was 20, and it took me until I was 43 to publish my first hardcover from Random House. So when it came to teaching, I wanted to help people figure it out before I did. And they always say you should teach the class you wanted to take and write the books you wanted to read. So I called my class the Instant Gratification Takes Too Long class, where the goal of the class is to get published by the end of the class, which I wrote about in Byline Bible. And this book is the Book Bible, How to Sell Your Manuscript No Matter What Genre Without Going Broke or Insane. And so basically this is how not to waste 20 years banging your head against the wall to figure out a book. So, and everyone's going to help you. Okay, so let's start with Amy Klein. So Amy, I'm going to spill everybody's secrets here, so I apologize in advance, but Amy was doing this fantastic fertility diary column for the New York Times. And I know at one point they were first person stories about her fertility journey to have her daughter. And I know you started it as a memoir and it didn't work as a memoir. And I thought what you did was really brilliant was, you know, a lot of people say, see, I tried my memoir, it didn't sell, it's all over, it doesn't work, the publishing industry sucks, they don't want people like me, they only want Tina Fey, it's over. But you didn't do that, Amy. So could you talk about how did you get from a first person memoir to a health parenting book, you know, with a great deal at Penguin Random House?
Thank you. So I was sending my proposal, my memoir, around to agents, and I had 2 agents who were very interested, but they gave me opposite advice. One person is like, I want this to be all self-help. I'm not interested in your story necessarily. I just want it to be all self-help. And then another agent is like, I'm not interested in your fertility journey. I'm only interested in your whole life, you know, how you grew up Orthodox. And I want to hear a memoir about your whole life with fertility as a little part. And then I liked both of them. It was funny. The one who wanted me to do more fertility self-help had fertility issues. And the one who wanted no fertility had 3 kids and wasn't interested. So that just goes to show you it's all about finding the agent who is interested in your journey. And I kind of sat on it for like 10 months. And at a certain point, I realized that the best way to do it, and what the world really needed was the combination of the two, like offer my advice when I could, but also speak to doctors and patients along the way. And I kind of did the same thing that you were talking about, Sue, is I wrote the book that I wish that I had during my fertility journey. So, you know, I spread it out in order of the same way, like, oh my God, you're not going to get pregnant. What do you do? How to find a doctor. Oh, I hate all my pregnant friends. Oh, I had a baby, you know, so just taking everyone through the whole journey. But it's not, I realized like when I was looking at the market as well, you know, a lot of people write fertility, they self-publish their own stories. And I realized that it's not about my story. It's only about my story where it's relevant. And it was interesting because neither of those agents that, you know, set me thinking, neither of them I ended up going with. I ended up going with an agent who was actually thinking about having a baby herself. So she was starting the fertility journey. So I think when you do research, just on a practical advice, if you're doing self-help or parenting or something, you know, my friend gave me a list of agents, of 10 agents in their 30s, because she said, this is what 30-year-olds are thinking about. Just go to these 10 agents. And I ended up with someone who wasn't one of the first 2 original agents. So if you can target, you know, they say don't judge by its cover, but if you could target your search, look at their profile pictures, look at what, you know, not only what books they do, but, you know, are they going through the same things you are going through? Are they interested, you know, in skiing or whatever you're writing about? That's my advice.
Yeah, and I have a whole chapter about genre fluidity, about ways that you can determine if your book doesn't sell the way you want it. That doesn't mean it's over. It means, like Amy, if you compromise, sometimes it becomes even more important and helps other people. Okay, Alan Henry is my editor at Wired, and he's a fantastic speaker to my classes, and everybody loves writing for him. So he has a debut book coming out called Seen, Heard, and Paid: The New Work Rules for the Marginalized. And what I was thinking with your book, Alan, is so many students come to me and they say, I want to write a book on China. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Are you Chinese? And they're like, no. I'm like, have you been to China? No. Do you have a PhD in Asian studies? No. And they just have no platform. And I don't understand where they're coming from. Now, it seems like to me, because you're an editor at Wired who takes service pieces, and you've been at the New York Times, and it just seems like this was a way where you took the most perfect platform to write the exact book that you should be writing. So could you talk about that? Did you do that intentionally? Did you know that I'm the exact person that should be writing this book? I have a great platform for it.
I had no idea about the platform. I did know that I was a person to write the book because so much of the book turned into kind of catharsis. So I wound up, I've been writing about productivity for a long time in general, right? But what I got tired of writing about productivity partially because I got burned out on experiencing what I experienced when I tried to put those same tips into action, right? So I was telling people how to organize their day or how to organize their calendars. And then I would get feedback from people who would say, hey, I took your advice, but my boss didn't really appreciate it. And I'm like, well, how did you go about it? What's different from you versus the guy who suggested the tip? And then I started to put 2 and 2 together. Yeah, what you were saying is important. Like, lived experience is important. You need the lived experience in order to be kind of an educated narrator, or be a reliable narrator. And I mean, yeah, we all have our fandoms. Like, somebody wants to write a book about China. Okay, I love Chinese food too, and I love actual Chinese food. Like, yeah, before I get myself in trouble. But like, that's the thing. I am not qualified to write a book on China. And sometimes I get pitches from people all regularly where they're like, I really want to write about a thing, but I have no expertise in it. And I'm like, okay, your voice is going to come out hollow. So I didn't, when I wrote my article about what to do when you feel discriminated against at work at the New York Times, I did that because I had to do it for myself. And honestly, if more people had known what I was doing at that time, they may have asked me to not write the article. That's my favorite part of that story. But that article led to other people saying, I resonate with that experience. I see myself in you. And it led to an agent and editor approaching me to say, lots of people are going to see themselves in you. You should expand on this idea. And that's how it happened for me.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Okay, Allie Gerber, I remember you took my class, you were publishing pieces. And then I think you made a brilliant decision that I don't think a lot of people know about, which is everybody knows you could do an MFA in poetry and fiction, but the new school actually has a specific program in Kid Lit. And you made a decision, which is a big commitment. I think it's 1.5 years or 2 years. You made a decision to go back to school, and it wound up leading you to 3 huge, fantastic, acclaimed, scholastic middle grade novels. So could you talk about that decision? Was that a hard decision to make? Because I knew you were already out of school for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think the decision, in some ways, the decision happened because of you. I mean, in all the ways, because I applied to Columbia, the new school, and Sarah Lawrence because I wanted to stay in the New York area, and they all had MFA programs. And I applied to like the grown-up MFA, like the adult fiction MFA program. I got rejected from Columbia, I got rejected from Sarah Lawrence, and I got waitlisted at the new school. And I called you hysterical. I was like in absolute agony and tears. I can't believe I didn't get it anywhere. And you said, okay, let me call my friend who I know at the new school and let's find out what happened there. So you called, and the person who had been in charge of the program at the time said, you know, she just applied to the wrong program. We have a writing for children and teens program, and she's writing a YA novel. And so I didn't even know I was writing YA. I didn't quite understand that that's what it was. And they said, if I reapply, I'll get in potentially. They'll reread my application. At the very least, they'll reread my application. So you said, well, what are you doing? Reapply. And I was like, sure, do I want to do that? And you said, of course you want to do that. And I was like, you're right, I do want to do that. So I reapplied, I got in, and it was like the perfect, it's like they made a program for me. It was perfect because I could work during the day, and the classes were all at night. So if you're, you know, if you need to pay your rent on your own, which I did, it made it a little easier because you know, and the expense of an MFA is quite large, but the new schools program is reasonable compared to some of the other programs. Or at least I should say it was at the time.
And if you don't mind, one of the teachers involved with the program wound up being, you know, is it Scholastic, right? So there was a perfect connection.
Yes, and my very first teacher actually ended up being my editor. So I figured out pretty quickly actually when I was at the program that I wasn't writing YA and that I really wanted to write middle grade, and middle grade is just below YA. So if you're not familiar with the genre, it's usually for readers 8 to 13, 8 to 14. So those because kids read up. So like you're writing about 10, 11, and 12-year-olds. And so my debut novel, like Alan was sharing, was from lived experience, Braced, about a girl with a back brace for scoliosis. And it took me a while to get there, to sort of figure out, what am I writing about? Why am I writing about this? I wrote a bunch of other books before, and all in Sue's writing group being like, why can't I figure out how to sell a book? I just had to find the story that I think was the beginning. And now I'm actually doing something totally different, which is like going to be a next part of my journey. But I had to write 3 books about my lived experience to be ready to write other things.
And also
so my advice is try to figure out what you need
being
to
in
write.
a program for 2 years with experts in that genre. I thought that's such a smart thing to do if somebody could afford it. Okay, so Kavita Das has a book out called Poignant Song, The Life and Music of Lakshmi Shankar. And what I thought with Kavita's book was a lot of new writers don't realize that a biography is a fantastic debut book, especially if you've done a few articles. And it's especially great if you happen to have a connection to somebody, if you've met the person or you've connected with somebody that doesn't have a book about them. So Kavita, I know that you did a lot of newspaper magazine work before, but could you tell us a little bit about how you came to pick a biography as a debut book?
Sure. Well, I think the biography kind of picked me. You know, I was working in social change. I was deep working in racial justice. And so I was not, you know, although I would write op-eds about the issues I was working on, I was not looking to write a book or a biography per se. I couldn't even think that large. But I started to become haunted while I was working in racial justice about thinking about how lives are erased from history one at a time. And so I thought someone, not me, should write about Lakshmi Shankar, because she's the sister-in-law of Ravi Shankar, the great sitarist. And so much of what we know about that era of Indian music coming to the West is from the male perspective, whether it's Western male or Indian male. So, and I knew her. She was a Grammy-nominated artist. She was probably the most prominent woman in that era. And I just thought, okay, here goes another brown woman who's going to be lost to history. But again, I didn't think that I could do it. I had a lot of imposter syndrome. But to your point, I mean, I think passion is really important, and so you have to really believe in what you're writing about. And for me, it was just really important that her story got out into the world. And so I didn't know, sometimes you take it one step at a time. So what I said is, well, while I was, working full time, and she lived in Los Angeles, I flew out to Los Angeles and I interviewed her a bunch of times. And I said, well, whether I write this or not, whether it's articles or a book, I need to have this, need to have this material. I need to talk to her. And unfortunately, she passed away in the middle of my project. But I kind of carried forth. And the other thing is that, this question of who's an American and whose story is worth, being told is a big question that still lingers. And someone said, why don't you publish, with an Indian publisher? India is a huge market for English speaking books. And I was like, oh, yeah. Oh, okay. How do I do that? And so I kind of, I had a mentor who helped kind of guide me in that direction. And so it got published with HarperCollins India.
Right. And what's brilliant about that, which I think Amy mentioned too, is, and Alan, who is my audience?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really smart thing for an author to figure out. So that was great. Okay, Kenan, you have an interesting story. So Kenan was a physical therapist and had this very traumatic, fascinating story of surviving ethnic cleansing in Bosnia and being exiled to America when you were 12. And but he didn't have a writing background and he had a full-time job. So Kenan, do you want to talk about, I think you made a decision that a lot of people don't realize is, is a great one to co-author.
Yeah, like you said, I have zero writing background. I come from science background and had zero platform. So during one of your book seminars, I met an agent and he was pitched an idea of an essay I wanted to write for New York Times, which ended up being published. And he said, if you ever want to write a book, you should email me. And then after class, I came up to you. And I remember I want to do the book, but I'm not doing this alone. If I don't do it with you, I'm not going to do it all. So the biggest decision I made is to co-author a book with you and just having a full-time job. And you and I worked night and day for about a year. And during that time, we used a ghost editor. We even had children's readers who read the children's section. I mean, the younger voice, because the book, the chapters extrapolate through time. They go from past tense to present tense.
Hey, by the way, okay, so for Bosnia List, we wrote it together. That's an adult memoir. We sold it to Penguin. So then why don't you slow down and tell the story of how did we decide to go from, how did you decide that you wanted to take an adult book and make it into a middle grade book? Do you want to say that, mention the Newsday piece?
Middle grade book started with an essay in Newsweek in 2016 against Muslim travel ban in certain countries. And when you posted that piece on your Facebook, an editor or teacher, or, former student of yours, saw it and reached out to you and said, since Kenan was 12 years old when he was exiled to America, this will make a great middle grade book to teach Americans how to treat immigrants, be kind and not fearful of foreigners. And at the time, it was very obviously timely what was going on in this country.
Right. I remember it was Joy Peskin and I was like, she's like, it would make a great middle grade memoir. I'm like, what's a middle grade memoir? And then if you don't mind me mentioning it, since it's hard to get the voice of a 12-year-old Muslim boy down, yeah, we used a ghost editor. In fact, a former student of mine, Abby Scher, who specializes in YA and MG, actually helped us. So I think a lot of people don't understand, like people come to me and say, I have this amazing story, or my grandfather's a Holocaust survivor, I lived through this thing. And they don't realize that if you're not a writer, sometimes it's really, really hard. It could take a decade to figure out, but you could hire a ghostwriter, a ghost editor, a co-author. And what, Kenan, for you, what was the benefit of that? Was it that you didn't have to deal with like proofreading and copy editing and all that when you were working full time?
Structure and the way the chapters were fit on the pages. Because remember when before the book, after Bosnian, before the Bosnian list was published, there was we only had one essay published, so I basically had to build a platform by publishing different essays, and they were extrapolated into chapters. But with the children's book, I remember we also read comp titles, and we wanted to really get the children's voice down and how to really add humor to such a dark story. And luckily, we found a brilliant children's book editor, Lynn Polvino, who published another adult-turned children's book called "And So Awful Falafel," and we got a lot of ideas from from that book. And
By the way, that's a really important point, is finding a comp title, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. It's really smart to find a comp title that's similar to your book, especially in a nonfiction proposal. And Kenan and I found one, and we wrote about it, about how we love this book, but that was from a woman's point of view, and it was a little bit funnier, funny and Farsi, and It Ain't So Awful Falafel. And miraculously, the editor who did those books saw ours and bought ours. So that was a great story about how it was worth taking the time to do that. Okay, let's see, Marie E. Andreu. Now, I remember in my class, you wrote some fantastic pieces. I think it was for the Washington Post and Newsweek about being an illegal immigrant from Argentina. But when it came time to publishing, you decided to not do nonfiction. I think you switched to YA novel. So could you talk about, how do you decide if it's based on a true story? How did you decide that this would be a great, these would be great YA novels?
Yeah, so I'd love to take the credit for being so brilliant and knowing that, but the market sort of decided for me. You know, I tried to get an agent, and I just kept getting rejected. And finally, you know, somebody gave me some good advice, which is all of the action in this story that you're trying to tell happens when the protagonist is a teenager. This is a teen story. This is YA, you know, and kind of similar to what you were saying, Alice. And I was like, oh, okay. You know, I haven't read that for a while, but let me kind of catch up and see what's going on. And then as soon as I started to read, you know, like, I mean, the genre has moved in ways that I just had not kept up with. And there's some beautiful work being done in the genre. I was like, yeah, if I'm lucky, I get to belong in this genre. There's so many beautiful books. And so I rewrote it as YA, and I got the first agent that I pitched. So something about it kind of must have resonated. It was just the right move for me at the right time. And
did you decide that fictionalizing was just easier to write or easier to sell?
Well, that's the good and second part of that question. Yeah. So I actually found, and I have a hard time, you know, it sounds counterintuitive. I found it easier to be true to the spirit of the story by fictionalizing it than, because when it was my story, I tried really hard to like, well, no, actually this happened, and then this happened precisely this way, and this person's important, and I cannot. And then when like I stepped away from all of that and just like, well, what's the spirit of the story? Like, what am I trying to talk about alienation and trying to assimilate, and then fighting assimilating, and you know, all of these things, then I was able to like kind of give that to a character, and it flowed a lot easier than trying to like excavate it and make it, you know, like a precise telling of what actually happened.
Interesting. And David Goodwillie, so you have two very acclaimed books out, American Subversive and Kings County, your new novel. And I was thinking with yours, David, I have a lot of students that'll spend 6 months a year on a novel, and they won't have luck with an agent or an editor. And then they'll either give it away for free to a tiny editor that doesn't pay, or they'll self-publish it, and then they'll sell 5 copies, and then they'll complain, and then they think it's all over. And one of the things that I've noticed that you've done, which I think is brilliant, is that it seems like you'll wait a chunk of time especially between your memoir and then the 2 novels. You'll wait 5 or 10 years if that's what it takes, I think, to finish a book and to get a hardcover from Simon & Schuster and to really launch it in a big way. And is that intentional? And also, how does an author do that? You know, like, do you wait until you get a big enough advance so then you could take off several years to spend time doing it?
I also write slowly, so that's part of it. I think, I write literary fiction, so that obviously takes a while, and you can't sell literary fiction unless you're, you know, Stephen King or somebody like that, until you're finished with a whole book. And so I'm also not one of these writers who, annoyingly, I have friends that are like this, that finish one book and immediately or write the end, and then they start the next day on the next one. I need like a while to figure out what I'm going to do next. And That said, the books write themselves and they're going to take their own time. I never rush it. I wrote a book in 2 years and I've written a book in 7 years. And it comes down to the book. And even the 7-year book, I wrote every single day and threw a lot more stuff out, and it was harder to get there. But you can't rush stuff, even nonfiction. It takes as long as it takes. Obviously, there are real life pressures that come in, and you need to make money and all that stuff. I also am interested in other stuff. So I write investigative pieces. I write reviews and stuff for the Times. I do other stuff not connected to writing at all. And in that way, I kind of get to the end of the book, maybe slower than other people, but I also I'm not the kind of writer that's going to write a book every 2 years in a kind of really thought out way like that. So it takes as long as it takes. You just can't rush it. And the more pressure you put on yourself time wise, I always think the worse the final product's going to be.
And I actually loved your memoir. Seemed like a good idea at the time. In fact, I remember when Charlie heard that you one of your many jobs that you wrote about over the years was selling baseball memorabilia for Sotheby's. And I remember, but so if I remember correctly, you wrote the whole novel, you wrote the whole memoir also, right? You didn't just sell it on a proposal. You wrote several, what was it, like 300 or 400 pages?
Yeah, Charlie's right behind you, by the way. Hi, Charlie. Yeah. I wrote I didn't know anyone in publishing when I wrote that. I'd had a bunch of different jobs in my 20s that were really crazy jobs. I was a professional baseball player. I worked at Sotheby's. I was a private investigator, .com boom up and down. And I turned 30 and I was like, I moved to New York to write. And it's the only thing I haven't done. And I didn't know anyone in publishing. I managed not to get an MFA. It was a mess. But I finally said, I'm going to try this thing. And I sat down and I wrote a whole book. Memoir is kind of, I think, a bit more like novels in terms of you need to write the whole thing. Like an editor needs to see what the book is going to be. And in that way, I wrote the whole thing. I didn't have an agent. I never thought about publishing, which I think is a great lesson. The more you think about getting a book published while you're writing it, it messes with your head. Like the more you can just focus on the writing and work, worry about the publishing of it afterwards, the better. And then this was 2006, so it's not advisable to do this, but I didn't know any agents at all. So I found out where the young agents used to go for drinks once a month in the East Village. And so I went down to that bar with a huge, Sue knows this story, with a huge manuscript. It was way too long. It was like 500 pages of nonsensical memoir. And I basically saw all these young, super smart looking agents in the corner of a bar on First Avenue, freaked out, went to the bar with this huge, stupid manuscript and sat there and had a panic attack. And wouldn't you know it, a young agent walked up and ordered a drink. And I basically, I don't know, probably told her my life story in 5 minutes, and she was trying to get away the whole time and said, well, just send it to my office the next day. And I did. And that's how I got my first agent. And that also shows, like, people ask a lot, should you live in New York if you're going to be a writer? And of course you don't have to, you can live anywhere, but New York is still where everybody is. The agents are, the editors are, the magazines are, the newspapers are. And in that way, it is still a very people industry. You meet people, they remember your name, they read something you've written for a newspaper somewhere, or a small clipping from something, and you run into them. And it really does help. People remember your name. And if they can put a name to that face, it really helps a lot.
What's really cool, though, is that now that I'm teaching online, I have all the editors and agents from LA, from all over, can zoom in. So It's really cool, as you could see them and you kind of can meet them and ask them questions and stuff. So if you don't, for the people that don't live in New York or LA, there's a lot of ways around it now, especially with the pandemic. So cool. Okay, so Tiffanie Drayton, congratulations on your debut book, Black American Refugee. Now, I say in both Byline Bible and in Book Bible that the fastest way often to get a book deal is you write and publish a great short piece in the New York Times or the New Yorker or Washington Post, and agents and editors come to you, and that yours was the fastest, most miraculous. So could you talk a little bit about, I mean, I literally think after your great piece came out in the New York Times opinion section, I think it was 2 weeks, and you had like a huge book deal from Penguin Random House. So could you talk about the steps of, I mean, it was Black Lives Matter, the movement was happening, so the timing was great. So could you talk about how else that happened?
Well, I guess the first thing is we have to talk about the miracle part, which would be Sue. Susan Shapiro is the miracle that made it happen, essentially, because Susan has always told me, look, listen, write the essay, get good placement, and then shoot for the book deal. And let's just say write the essay portion took about 9 years.
Well, you published quite a lot of great material. Right?
Yeah, no, it was actually really fantastic to be able to take all of that time to really get into my voice and work on cultivating my voice. And so over the course of, let's say, maybe like my 7-8 year career, I really worked on getting good placement for essays. So as soon as I hit that New York Times opinion piece, the first person I called is the miraculous Sue. I said, Sue, what do I do? And Susan is like, what do you mean, what do you do? Make sure that you put in the bio that you're working on a memoir. And I was like, but I'm not working on a memoir. She's like, but yes, you are. And I was like, yes, I am. So that's literally what happened. In the bio, I put, I'm working on a memoir. And then I ended up hooking up with a great agent, once again, via the miraculous Sue, who has graced us on her birthday to give us these fantastic tips. And as soon as I hooked up with my agent, I was like, look, listen, I want this proposal on desk tomorrow, the next day, next week, immediately. And she really thought I was crazy because she's like, how are you gonna write a proposal that fast? I was like, I'm gonna do it. And so I just cranked it out as quickly as I could, because timeliness is key. And of course, when you see your moment, you have to be present to meet that moment. And fortunately for me, after all of those years of cultivating my voice through all of that essay writing, as soon as that big moment sparked with all of those protests, I was right there to meet the moment and right there to ask for, to put forth my proposal for that book deal. So that's how it happened.
Great, and as Kavita said, you've written about racism and gentrification in this country a lot. So this was really a subject that you had been writing about and you knew well. So it felt like it was exactly what you wanted to be writing, right?
Oh, absolutely. To that point, it's so essential, in my opinion, that you're writing from a place of not only personal experience, but from passion. And for me, that burning passion comes from the knowing and from also that desire to change, because you understand so thoroughly how important it is for that change to happen, probably because it's impacted you or because you've seen how it's impacted your community or any number of reasons. But so that's why, in my opinion, it's really great to be very close to a story sometimes, because it gives you that opportunity to speak from that place of like burning passion.
Fantastic. Okay, next question I'm going to ask you guys is, what kind of advice do you give to people who might want to write a similar book? So Amy, I know that you've been an editor at a lot of places and you're a freelance writer. What advice do you give to somebody who maybe has a memoir or a health or a parenting book idea?
I mean, I think it's important, like you say, is to get placement in the big places if you can, and if not, just
short. So you think starting with short pieces that you try to sell to the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, those kind of places, you think that's the best way to start?
I mean, when they're looking at your book, they want to see, why are you the person to write this book? And I think Alan mentioned that he was the person to write this book. They want to know that you are going to push it. You are going to have connections to the right places. So as you're trying to sell your book, you have to, unfortunately or fortunately, build your platform. And that just means they want to see, who is this person and why is this person writing this book? I mean, Tiffanie had her 9 years of experience. So I wrote about fertility. I wrote about my own journey. And I was the first person in that space. So I was the person to write that book, I think. So you should just keep, if you can, stick to 1 or 2 subjects and just keep, honing in on that platform to make it the best you can make it.
Great. And I always say to people, it's a hell of a lot easier to sell 3 pages than 300. So it's a great place to start. I mean, Alan, so you've let a lot of my students break into Wired, and I love Wired. I love writing for you. Could you give advice if people wanted to pitch you, or what are you seeing that people are getting wrong? Like, do you get pieces that, you're in a technology magazine and you're in a section that does service? Do you get pitches where people are pitching you other things that don't fit?
I mean, I don't mind the pitching the other things that don't fit so much, because I'm fine going hat in hand to like my colleagues and saying, hey, the story might be good for your section. But the one thing that I do find a lot of people, some folks are so eager to break in general that they stop short of thinking about the outlet that they're pitching to. So when I was at the New York Times, I had way more leeway to take different kinds of stories. I worked on a desk that was kind of in between a lot of the traditional desks at the New York Times. So I could pick stories that had elements of multiple areas. At Wired, I mean, it's a technology publication. So you pitch me a story that has no technology intersection and I can't help you. And some folks are so eager that they forget, like, wait a minute, consider the pub and consider the voice. And just because the pub is wrong doesn't mean you have a bad story. It doesn't mean the story's not right. It just means I may not be the right person to bring it to. Now, granted, a lot of folks have great relationships with me personally. So I'm like, yeah, I'm fine sending this over to a friend who still works at the Times. Yeah, I'm fine sending this to somebody who works at the Atlantic. But like, I'm now spending my own kind of mental and emotional and professional capital to help you out. And I don't mind doing that because, I mean, I had to get where I am somehow, but also don't rely on that, right? So that's kind of a thing. But also the one big piece of advice I'd give anyone, especially about big papers, and like so much of this industry revolves around getting published in like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or like a big newspaper, a big magazine. And people kind of psych themselves out thinking, oh, my voice isn't good enough for that pub, or oh, my writing doesn't rise to the New York Times level. It does. It does. I worked at the Times for 4 years, and that's not a long time compared to a lot of Times lifers. But let me tell you, there's some stuff that a new writer that has never worked with me before can write circles around a New York Times columnist whose name I could drop, who's been there for like 35 years. So don't sell yourself short, because if you psych yourself out, no one's going to take you seriously. So come in full-throated and be your best advocate.
Great. Therapy really helped me with that one. So
for sure.
Yeah, because you definitely feel like the imposter syndrome. Ailey, if you don't mind me mentioning, I had a student who was working on a debut middle grade novel, and I suggested they work with you because you did some ghost editing, and then they got a great deal from FSG. So I love ghost editors. So I know that you do it. So could you talk a little bit about that? Do you think that that might be the secret weapon that could take somebody over the edge for a kids book?
I think that's a really good example, because this was a student who had gotten a big, I think it was a Washington Post article. And so she had interest from an editor. And so she was putting together a proposal based on that, but didn't have a lot of experience reading or working in middle grade. So coming to somebody like me to help you sort of like figure out, okay, what middle grade books do I need to read right now so that I understand the market? And then how can I tailor my proposal to this agent? In this case, I think it was an editor who was interested. But she needed to get an agent to help with the negotiations. It's really important if you get an offer from an editor to secure an agent to help you negotiate. You don't necessarily want to walk into a complicated negotiation without somebody who's dedicated to being on your side. And so I helped tailor the proposal to middle grade, just because I know the genre. I mean, I've been in the genre now for a very long time. So if that's something that you're interested in, I'm happy to either help you with that or help find you somebody. And if you're interested in YA, between me and Sue, we could help find you the right person. So I think that always working with a ghost editor on something like that is fantastic, and sort of reaching out to people who are already in the industry, who are sort of experts in the genre. But I wanted to say that I never really published a lot of personal essays. I'm always like, Amy, how do I do this? Or like, I was always psyched out, and I still to this day have not published like big, huge personal essays. So if you're thinking about a book deal and you're having a hard time getting personal essays published, one thing doesn't always have to do, like, just because you're really good at writing and pitching personal essays doesn't mean that they're not the same exact skill set. So if you haven't had a lot of luck, don't be scared. It's like, okay, I didn't have a lot of luck either. I wrote for a lot of small publications and ended up getting a big deal with Scholastic. So, I think it just feel like it's okay.
Yeah, and also I think what you said is really smart, which is I only work with ghost editors who are either former editors, former agents, or authors who publish in that genre. Because I once got, for when I was doing my first book, 5 Men Who Broke My Heart, I had some poets critiquing me, taking me in the total wrong direction of making it dark and about death. And it's like, no, it was commercial memoir. So now I only recommend that someone works with someone in the exact genre. So that's,
Allison, I meant for nonfiction, you need a platform more than for fiction.
but even for, yeah, even for fiction. Yeah, no, even for fiction, it helps. Okay, so Kavita, your new book is called Craft and Conscious, How to Write About Social Issues. And I know you've taught about that. So what kind of advice do you give people if they want to, you know, whether it's a book idea or whether it's, you know, shorter pieces, what kind of, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you could recommend?
Well, no, I think, you know, what you said, I mean, that book, the new book that's coming out in October, I created the class that I wish I had had when I came to writing after working in social change. And you know, things that I had figured out about how to write about social issues with integrity, but also in a way that's compelling that people want to read. So, you know, some people who take my class, some are writers, some are change agents, you know, it's a mixture of people who have had personal experiences with a social issue. So it's a mix. And I've been teaching this class for several years. And then I was like, oh, if I write a book, then I can reach more people. So that's how, you know, the idea for the book came out. But I think, you know, even with the biography, I mean, one thing I am encouraged to say, given what I was working in social change before coming to writing, I do think things are changing glacially, but they're changing. And so like even biography, you know, it was very, very white, written by white males about white males, you know, when I was coming to it. And so I was like, oh, who can I look to? Who, you know, so I had to work to find the right, you know, writers. But biography itself is being exploded, you know, in terms of if, you know, biographies don't have to start at the beginning, at birth, and go till death. You're having really interesting ones that are really short or focus on a moment in time, focusing on hidden figures, you know, group biographies. So I think it's becoming less stodgy and less kind of academic-y. So I had a lot of imposter syndrome, you know, when I came in, but I'm really happy to see that it's slowly, you know, the gears are shifting. So like other people are saying, you know, things are changing, and what you have to do is find those parallel comparables, the author or the writer who's, you know, trying to do things in a similar way or with the similar voice, you know, that you're, you know, like even irreverent biographies, you know, things like that.
Cool. And Kenan, you've talked about the benefits of doing short pieces all throughout the book process. So you did a New York Times piece that helped you get an agent and a book deal, but then all throughout you were doing short pieces, and actually the short piece for Newsday led to the next book. So could you talk about that? Was it easier for you to write 900 or 1,000 words at a time?
900,000 words became chapters, but the difficult part was getting it published. So my advice is, when you join a writing group, we take classes, book seminars, rewrites. I remember our first essay took first try, and I thought, oh, this is pretty easy, get published in New York Times Magazine. However, the second piece took 17 rewrites and nothing worked. However, one sentence made it work, and that in April of 2012, it was 20th anniversary of the Bosnian War, and just by mentioning that in the first line, got the piece published in New York Times op-ed. So you want to write something no one has written before. And two things I learned from you, and the most important things is just because something happened doesn't mean it's important. And show, don't tell.
Cool. And I remember you had another piece that about the war, and I think, didn't you sell it on Memorial Day?
Yeah, it was about finding a man who saved our family. So that became one of the chapters. So that was why it was easier to plan these chapters ahead by having all these different pieces published. I remember we had 7 or 8 pieces that were published, and they all became chapters.
Became a chapter. Yeah, so that's great.
And, I mean, you got to be up with news, and like, why would this be timely? And just because somebody says no doesn't mean it's not publishable. You just have to find a different angle and a different publishing editor. That's why it's really important to meet these agents and editors, to find out to meet them and find out what kind of stuff they like to publish. And also you want to learn how to pitch your story. So that's another class you can take.
Cool. Maria. So when it came to taking a real life story and then making it into YA, is there any other advice that you could give? And did writing it first, did having success in the Washington Post and Newsweek and small places, did that help you figure out getting published as a book?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, even just lots of conversations with you, just beginning to understand the shape of it. It's like, oh yeah, you publish short pieces, and then the next step is you get, find an agent, or you write the thing and find an agent. So just being around people who are doing the work. I would again second what Allison said, particularly I think in all genres, but particularly in kid lit. It's so important to read currently and broadly, because a lot of us can think like, oh yeah, these are the books I loved to read when I was a kid, but that facet of the industry is changing so quickly. You really kind of need to be up on like what the conversation is and who's getting picked up, and focus a lot on debuts, like what are publishers looking for from new writers. And so that was really important to me. I had to kind of school myself in that before being able to like break in.
Great. And David, what kind of advice do you have for people that want to do literary fiction?
Well, I guess obviously literary fiction is tough because it's about the writing, and you're going to sell a book based on how well you tell a story, how richly you develop characters, and that kind of magical melding of all of that. But what I've always done, and it's certainly helped me career-wise, is while I've been focused on the writing part, I've always been focused on the business of publishing too. And I've known what's going on with editors and publishers and imprints and agents. And it's helped me immeasurably in terms of when it does come time to find an agent, or when your agent puts together a list of editors she's going to send the book to, you go over that list and say, wait a minute, what about this editor who's been publishing XYZ? Why isn't he or she on that list? And you can help your own cause by knowing what's going on in that industry, by knowing what other editors are buying stuff like your book. Agents are not infallible. They overlook people. They don't know some editors. Some publishers have new imprints that you think would be perfect for the book. All of this stuff that's going on with the industry. And there are ways, I subscribe to Publishers Marketplace, which is a little email that I get every day at lunch, and a longer thing on, once a week on weekends. And I read it and I see who's buying what, and what the industry gossip is, and what's hot and what's not, and all that stuff. And it has helped me a great deal in the past, so that when I was ready to sell Kings County in 2018, which was it's a love story set in Brooklyn in the early 2000s during the kind of music scene, the indie music scene there. That's a book that's going to be right for some editors, but not right for other editors. And so I knew the editors that I thought would be kind of hip to that kind of thing, and made sure they were on that list. And one of those editors ended up being the underbidder for the book, and she wasn't even on the list to start with. So that helped me a ton. So I would pay attention not just to your writing, which is the most important by far, but to the industry, because that's something that you can help yourself with.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was doing this Am Writing podcast, and KJ, who was a former New York Times editor, she said she thought that everybody should read the book Bible, like anybody that's interested in writing first, because it sets out, not only does it give you like the broad overview of the publishing business, but also it's like publishing porn, because it's like all these inside stories.
Yeah.
And I wish I would have understood that. It took me so many years to understand that. Tiffanie, what kind of advice do you give to people who want to sell a memoir based on a proposal?
Well, I would say that fundamentally having people in your corner and having people rooting for you and people who can guide you is one of the most important things. It has been for myself, and the way that I gained access to those things, or whether it be through classes, or whether it be through writing workshops, or just finding those communities and online spaces. Like in Facebook, I'm a part of a group for women writers. And that has been, actually, it's through that group that I was able to land that New York Times piece. That's how I was connected to the editor at the New York Times. So it's so essential that you find your little community of writers, and that you realize that that community is really going to help you get access to where you need to go. But aside from that, it's really essential that you are putting in the work, and you realize it's a commitment, and that commitment has to be really driven by passion and a love for what you're doing. Because if you're like me, and it's like 10 years later, and you feel like you have gotten nowhere in terms of publishing your book, like, okay, I've landed this piece, I've written here, I've written there, and I still haven't had this book, and you can feel completely overwhelmed. But for me, I never felt that way, because I loved writing, and I just loved what I was writing about. And so I would say those are the two big things for me.
No, I'm glad you said that, because I also want to add, in terms of advice, somebody, Jennifer Baker, who was an electric lit editor, who's now at Random House. She gave advice and she said, if you want to get ahead, be a good literary citizen first. And so she said, read what you want to be writing. And if if there's a small press book you like, if you can't afford it, then you could at least go to an event, follow, if you like anybody here, follow us on social media, which is really cool. And then you can learn all kinds of inside secrets. If you like a book, review it on Amazon and Goodreads and Barnes and Noble, especially if it's not, like Stephen King doesn't really need your review, but so if it's somebody new. So that reminds me of it. Okay, so my last question, then we'll open it up. So what's next? What's new? Amy Klein, are you working on something new now?
Yeah, I'm working on a book that's, instead of a combination of self-help and memoir, it's kind of memoir and reported related to the fertility industry, but trying to combine my own voice with reporting about what's going on in that industry.
Fantastic. And Alan, I heard a rumor that you might be the keynote speaker for the ASJA conference in May, which is right before your book comes out in June. So what else do you have going on? Do you have any events planned yet for the June book?
I may have a book party, I think, maybe, but like other than that, no, not yet. But I do write a newsletter that is associated with the book called Productivity Without Privilege, which was the first title of the book. And yeah, there's info on how to sign up for that at I drop my Twitter. Yeah, I'll just put the chat. I will put it in the chat.
So yeah, so if you want to write for Alan or you're interested in what he's doing, then the newsletter, that's brilliant. Great. Okay, Allie, what are you working on? New book?
Yeah, I have a big secret that I can't tell you about, but if you follow me on Instagram, as soon as the secret is revealed, you will get to know about it. It's really good. It's a really good secret.
Okay, cool. And
Kavita,
when is Craft and Conscious, how to write about social issues? When does that come out?
It drops October 4th, hopefully, by Beacon Press.
Great. And are you going to do, well, we don't know yet if we're going to be in person or on.
Yeah, and I and in between, like I am teaching, writing about social issues at Catapult through the Catapult platform. So between now and then, I'll probably be teaching a couple of times.
Fantastic. And if you want to put a link in the chat, you can. So Kenan, you recently came out with World in Between, middle grade book. And I know you said you're going to be doing some online events in schools. And also you still do Bosnia List online events in colleges, right? I think you're muted.
Once I get a list of high school and college teachers who reach out to me, who use the Bosnia List as a book when they teach genocide and European history or religion. This March, late March, I have a Zoom conference with one of the schools in Virginia. It's a high school. They basically host this international world event where the future youth of the world are discussing the issues that are broadening the world. So I'll be part of it.
Cool. And if anybody needs a speaker about European history or Bosnian or Muslim genocide for high school, college, or middle grade, he's been great at that and can do everything online now. Maria, are you working on a new book? Oh, you actually Love in English recently came out, right?
Yeah, and it's coming out on paperback on February 2nd. So I'll be doing like some making some noise about that. I haven't quite figured out yet. And I am working on another book that should be out in May of next year. So
fantastic. And David, so I was at the fantastic book party for Kings County in Brooklyn in June. I'm so glad you had that great party in June before another wave. So are you working on a new book already?
I am working on a new book, and Kings County came out in paperback, so it is available at all these stores, including the Strand, I think. And it is it got optioned for screen, so we're writing a pilot, which I've never done, so that's kind of exciting and scary in its own way.
Amazing. And Tiffanie, your official pub date for Black American Refugee is February 15th?
Yep, it's February 15th. And I guess my biggest hurdle between now and then is just staying sane. So that's what I'm working on these days.
Are there any events planned that we can sign up for yet, or are they going to announce them?
There are some online events planned thus far, and you can find them on Penguin Random House under my author profile, Tiffanie Drayton.
You can also put it,
If you find me on Facebook, I'll be sharing all of that information, so you can
you can
follow
also
me.
put it in the chat if you want. You can put it
Sure,
in.
I'll definitely do that as well.
Okay, good. And Sabir said we can go a little bit over. And so there's 4 questions in the Q&A. So let's ask these questions. Shelley Herman says, my nonfiction humorous showbiz manuscript is done and I have an offer from a publisher. I've been advised to get a ghost editor and keep searching for a better publisher. How can I do that from the Los Angeles area? Okay, does anybody have, anybody want to jump in? I mean, you can always email me. By the way, anybody here, email me propsue123@gmail.com, because it doesn't matter where your ghost editor is, right? Because you usually work by computer. Yeah, anybody have anything to add?
I can actually jump in because I've been ghostwriting for some years now. So pretty much the best thing to do is the step 1 is really just you need an agent. Agents will always connect you with a great ghostwriter. If your manuscript or if your proposal or whatever document that you're using to sell your book isn't quite ready for an agent, that means that perhaps you need to first work on getting an editor to kind of help you to make sure you put together that package so that an agent would be interested. But once you secure the interest of an agent, they can pretty much put you onto ghostwriters like myself or like any number of people who would then push it forward and make sure that your proposal gets into the good hands of the folks with all the money who can make you rich.
And Tiffanie, somebody wants to know what's the name of the Woman Writers Facebook group you're a part of?
Yeah, y'all don't know about secrets. There's some secrets you gotta keep. In any case, if you inbox me, I'll put you on, but it's private, so I can't say it out loud. Sorry.
Okay, and then Daryl Newton says, I published 2 academic books and I'm trying to sell a book of dystopian sci-fi. I hired a lawyer with a rather large media firm to write intro letters for me to send to publishers along with sample chapters and the like. Is this a good thing or is this a mistake? I don't think that's the way it's done. So let's talk to the people who have done fiction. So let's see. So David, you write fiction and you take your novel when it's ready and you go right to an agent, right?
Yeah, you don't want to, I mean, unless it's some special lawyer who deals in publishing, you don't want a lawyer. You want an agent. And the best way to find an agent, well, there's a million places online that you can look up, but especially if you're writing genre stuff like that, go look in the Barnes & Noble, in the Strand, and look at books similar to the one you've written and go to the acknowledgements and see who their agent is and send them your book because they obviously like that kind of stuff. And yeah, lawyer with connections is not necessarily the best way to go.
Good. And Allie, you're writing fiction. So do you agree that
I agree. I also think David had mentioned Publishers Marketplace, and that's another good. You can sign up for their like Publishers Lunch emails, and you can see who's selling and who's buying sci-fi. And you know, whatever agents are selling the kind of stuff that you write, I would look up what else they represent and see if it's a fit and if there's somebody you'd want to work with and query them.
I actually know a big agent for sci-fi, so if you email me, I'll tell you. And Marie, any advice to add, Maria, since you do fiction?
Yeah, and also this was advice I really hated hearing, but I'm going to share it because it is spot on. Really make sure that you are putting your very best foot forward. I'm the kind of person that gets very eager and it's like, oh, I finished it. I want to, you know, but particularly if you're first trying to get an agent, make sure you've workshopped it, make sure you've had readers on it, that you've gotten, and like Sue was saying, you know, readers that understand the genre or preferably are in the genre, and then query an agent because you just have like a very short window for them to pay attention to you. And then you just want to give them like the something that could be sitting on a shelf already. For the first book, unfortunately, you have to rewrite it, the whole thing, and make sure it's that polished before you query.
Great. And Kenan, somebody asked that you publish small essays and they would lead to chapters. Do you republish the essay that was already published in your book, or do you have to rewrite it? You hear, Kenan?
Well, I'm not rewriting it. I'm just, so essay can be 3 pages with 900 words, but the chapter can get up to like 15 or 20 pages. So the essay gets embedded into a chapter. It doesn't look like a piece, but there's a lot of information in that I mentioned in the essay that becomes part of a chapter.
Yeah, so it's expanded.
Yeah, it's expanded, yeah.
Fantastic. And by the way, there's usually very little trouble if you publish a short piece. It's very rare that you would have trouble then putting it in a book. Sometimes you just have to write at the beginning, parts of this, earlier sections of this ran in the New York Times, the New Yorker, Salon. And what's great about doing that is then they're more likely to review your book. The only time, once in a while, you'll get a contract that for a short essay that says we own all the rights. So that's the only time you have to be careful, or we own the film rights, but otherwise we don't. Okay, I think let's see, did we answer all the questions? Let's see, Susan, may we have your email address again? It's propsue123@gmail.com. Anyway, you guys, thank you so much for coming. This was amazing. So get the book Bible. It's the pub date for the book Bible. It was a thrill. And let me just thank first, I want to thank Sabir and Tico and Nancy Bass at the Strand. Thank you guys all for coming. And let me mention the names of the panelists who shared their advice, and everybody check out their books, buy their books if you can, review them, follow us on social media. My shrink always said, hang out with people you want to be. So it's really cool that you came to the event and that you could connect with everyone. Okay, so Amy Klein's book is The Trying Game. Alan Henry, who's an editor at Wired, his debut book, which you can pre-order, is Seen, Heard, and Paid. Ali Garber has 3 books out, Braced, Focus, and the most recent one is Taking Up Space. Kavita Dus has Poignant Song is already out, and her new book coming out from Beacon Press is Craft and Conscious, How to Write About Social Issues. Kenan Trebincevic, his debut memoir was The Bosnia List, and his most recent book that came out is Middle Grade, World in Between. Maria A. Andreu wrote The Secret Side of Empty, and her new novel is Love in English. David Goodwillie is the author of a great memoir, seemed like a great idea at the time, and his 2 novels are American Subversive at Kings County, recently came out in paperback. Tiffanie Drayton has her debut book, Black American Refugee. And my new book is the Book Bible, and I have all kinds of classes. Now I'm online, so all my classes and seminars and events are online. So thank you so much for joining us. This was fantastic. Congratulations to everybody for these fantastic books. And I quit all my addictions, which I wrote about in 4 other books. So I'm now addicted to email. So I promise if you email questions, I'm now addicted to email. I'll answer every single one.
Sure.
So, thank you. Any final advice anybody wants to throw out?
The best. Follow her
I
advice.
just want to say that y'all make sure that you hit me up and you ask me questions now, because if I get too busy, I can't respond. I'll feel bad. So it's better that you do it now and don't wait. Don't hesitate. Find me on the Facebook, and you have my email. I'll put it in the chat. And if you need any help or need anything, now is the time.
Now is the time, because once her book comes out, she's going to be crazy.
And I'm
So,
not going.
good.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. Good. Anything else? Anybody else want to add anything?
Congrats.
Okay, thank you.
Happy birthday, Sue.
Happy birthday,
birthday.
Sue.
I have
Happy
a
birthday.
great
Bye.
book panel for my
birthday.
birthday. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Everybody.